Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Suicide Intervention in Indigenous Communities and Life Promotion session. My name is Anne. I'm joined by my colleague Ella, and we will be your moderators for this session. Before we get started, I will review some quick housekeeping notes, and then I will introduce our speaker and begin the session. I would like to draw your attention to the bottom of your screen. You can use the chat feature to submit questions. Please type question in all caps in the chat before your question to make it easier for us to find them. The presenter will be taking questions at the end of her presentation. We will do our best to ask as many questions as we can during the time we have. Please ensure your microphone is on mute until the Q&A portion of this session. Please note that we will be recording this session to upload to the conference website for future viewing by those who have registered for the conference. You will be able to access the platform for 90 days following the conference. We kindly ask that you complete a short evaluation at the end of this session. Your feedback is appreciated and will be used to inform future events such as this conference. Lastly, we would like to respectfully ask all of those attending today's session to engage with each other thoughtfully and always consider the impact of your words and interactions on others. As moderators, we will not tolerate abusive or inappropriate behavior and will ensure that anyone who engages in such behavior is removed from this session. I would now like to introduce our presenter for this session, Shannon Crate from the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation and Feather Carriers. Over to you, Shannon.
Hello, everyone out there, all you little black boxes and names from all over, it looks like Ontario. I am honored to be here today. My English name is Shannon Crate. I come from the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. We're about an hour north of Toronto, a little tiny island on Lake Simcoe. If there are any other Anishinaabes out there in Zoom today, I say, when I say Snidishnakas, I'm telling you my spirit name, which is Little Wolf. But when I say where I come from, I say Ajonyang Nadunjaba. Often that's mistaken if you speak the language for what we now know as money. A long time ago, they say, when the settlers came over 500 years ago, they brought with them money. And we didn't have a word for money because we didn't use it. But when they held it out, those coins, they shined like the top of the water. And so we called it that. We started calling money a Ajonyang. And then after so many, hundreds of years in our community, that's become the word we know for money. And the way we say it here, our dialect is a Ajonyang. You got any Jon? We're saying, do you got any money? But the original name of where I come from is Georgina Island, and it was called Where the Water Shines, the Shimmering Waters. So I'm actually saying, hello, my name is Shannon, and I come from where the water shines. Just in case there's any speakers out there, I don't want them thinking I'm saying, hi, my name's Shannon, and I come from money, because that is not what I'm intending to say. So my mom was born and raised there. And my dad was a non-native man from Joggins, Nova Scotia in the Bay of Fundy. And so sometimes I like to say, I'm a walking treaty. I'm an example of when two cultures come together and they live together with love, respectfully, they can create a beautiful life together. So I've been the band rep, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the session today. But I've been the band rep and the child well-being manager in my community for 27 years. Before that, I was out west working in Vancouver. I started my career with Cindy Blackstock at Squamish Nation. And She was a social worker, and I was a youth drug and alcohol counselor worker and a court worker then. So it's been a long road to get to where I am today. And in the last few years, I've been doing a lot of work with feather carriers outside of my role in my community, which is a leadership for life promotion program. And so I'm going to talk about that and how I incorporate that into my job of child welfare. So feel free to turn on your camera if you want to. But also feel free to turn it on and put up your hand if you have any questions or you want me to stop and clarify. I'm not a PowerPoint presenter, so I'm a storyteller. So I used to have a hard time with that when people would tell me I was a storyteller. But I've come to accept that that's a good thing, especially in my culture. I had a Western mind for a long time. When people would say I was a storyteller, I would think they were telling me I was telling lies. So now I understand that it's our way of teaching and learning and sharing information. So often when I get asked to do training, and I've done a lot of training in Ontario and actually across Canada, but a lot of training with children's aid societies and mental health agencies, child and family services, just different places. But I always say the same thing. If I'm going to come and do a training, and you want to learn about Indigenous ways of knowing and doing and being, then you should learn in an Indigenous way of teaching. And that's much different than how we're accustomed to learning, which would be, I would be sitting here with a PowerPoint on, and I would be giving you lots of information, telling you these are the facts, and you could write it all down. And sometimes even at the end, there's a quiz or a test. And if you get what I say, you give it back to me exactly the same way, then it's right and you've done well. That's completely opposite than Indigenous way of teaching and learning. We do it through storytelling. And when we tell someone a story or our story, it's honoring the intelligence of the listener. So you are going to take from my story what you want. You can incorporate it into your practice or your life, however it makes sense to you, and you can leave behind the parts sometimes you hear things right away and it's like, oh, that makes sense. And sometimes you wonder, why did she say that? Or why did that person tell me that? And 6 months down the road, it makes sense. So we talk about storytelling a lot in our teaching. If we were in person, we would be sitting in a circle, and the bundle would be out with some traditional medicines, my feather, depending what we were doing, they would be there for us to use. Sometimes I call that the buffet of love, that everything we need is there. And we can just dive into it. If things start getting heavy, that we take care of ourselves with those medicines. So if you have any of those things, keep them close by, because we're going to be talking about some pretty heavy stuff. And so always just to take care of yourself and be mindful of bringing those things into the room if you need them. So feather carriers is done the same way I would do my normal training for children's aid societies and those other agencies, in the way that we gather in a space, we sit in a circle. When we sit in a circle, it's because there is no hierarchy. I don't know any more than anybody else here, that we all can share experiences and stories and learn from each other. And like, I only know this much, but I'm here to share what I do know. And if you have anything you want to add to the conversation, please feel free to do that. Although there's a lot of you, so the few that have your cameras on, I can hardly see you, you're so small, but I really appreciate that you're there. So feather carriers is how it started, was in the Indigenous communities in my area. So again, I'm just an hour north of Toronto. It happened over in the Simcoe Muskoka region, where there was conversations about the epidemic of suicide, and that the mainstream traditional suicide prevention programs that were available weren't really addressing the needs, or they certainly weren't preventing them from happening. And so the Indigenous community started to talk about how they were missing in those programs, and this isn't to be disrespectful to those programs, but they were missing pieces like the intergenerational trauma, the impacts of colonization, all of those things that have on our people. And so they started talking about developing an Indigenous-based suicide prevention program. And so they went out and they asked the people, they asked the elders, what is it that is missing? What do our people need? And they spoke in the language. And when they sat down and they looked at everything that they had learned, it was not suicide prevention programs that the community needed, that is kind of a real mainstream approach to be waiting until that point in a person's life to put in a program, when in fact we should be doing life promotion, that we should be talking to the people and promoting life. Like, why do they want to be here? What is their purpose? Who are they? Where are they going? All of these really essential things that we need for our well-being. And that the response that people were learning was a little too scripted, and kind of there's a conversation around, like, not gatekeeping, but, or maybe that's the word, that you needed to be trained in these programs to prevent suicide in a specific way. So we were looking at, all people can be life promoters, and how do we do that? So that's how Feather Carriers was kind of born. And there were some real key people in that: Dr. Ed Connors, Elder John Rice, Dr. Debbie Denard, Brenda Jackson, Jermaine Elliott, and they started this program. And now it's kind of really taken off. It stands alone as Feather Carriers, Leadership for Life Promotion. It happens, how they do the training is, it happens 4 times a year. So it takes a whole year to take the program, but it's in 4 sessions. So the very first time you come together, it's a 2-day session. So usually say that's done in the fall, and then in the winter, the spring, and the summer. After the first initial 2 days, the next 3 times you come together is a full 1-day training. And then at the end of the year, you graduate from the program. So some of the things that you talk about or you explore in Feather Carriers is your identity, your own identity, right? So that you start to learn how to tell your story. So we know the people that come to the program are often people that have lost someone, or are at risk, or working with people that are at risk of dying by suicide. We even reframe it, and we call it unnatural premature death. And so that there are many people that we lose to unnatural premature death that may be, from addictions or other things, as well as suicide. So we talk about that. We talk about our identity, and we know that there are 4 essential questions that are, important in a person's well-being. And those questions are: where do I come from? Who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? Those 4 questions. So those are 4 things that we explore through Feather Carriers training. And so it starts with yourself, really understanding your own identity. Where do I come from? And for First Nations people, that's not an easy question for many of us to answer. For me, for an example, I had a really hard time identifying, of understanding, where I came from, because I knew my mom came from Georgina Island. I grew up in Indian housing right outside of my community. But when she married my dad, the government sent her a letter congratulating her that she was no longer an Indian, and she lost her status and her land and her grandmother's house and had to move off the reserve. And she became a non-Native woman. And so I got raised, and people used to ask me, like my friends from town, when they'd see my mom, they would ask me, why is your mom so brown? And I would say, oh, she used to be an Indian, but she's not anymore. Like I had no sense of identity of who I was, because it was all attached to what the government was telling me who I was and who my mom was and where I belonged and where I couldn't live on reserve because I wasn't status. My mom couldn't live there anymore. So there are so many ways, from residential school, the 60s scoop, child welfare, all of these things through colonization that have really hurt our identity and knowing where we come from. So it's not always just as simple as it should be in understanding where do I come from, or who am I, how do I identify as half, all of these things, where do I belong? So we start with that. We start looking at that. And we do that through storytelling, telling our own story, understanding those things, and talking about, I want to be really careful with the word decolonization, because it can be really triggering for some people. Like, I don't, and I'm not good with language. I should have told you in the very beginning that I'm also neurospicy. So I can hear my 20-year-old daughter in my ear right now going, cringe, mom. But I am ADHD. So that means sometimes, most of the times, things come out of my mouth and I hear them for the first time at the same time as you. And then I go, wait, why did I say that? Well, I struggle sometimes with words or language. I say the wrong things. I'm not good with them. So I'm going to ask for forgiveness right now if I say anything that sounds wrong. Please call me on it, because that's how I learn. But just struggling with, how do I identify? Who am I? So, like, those are all words. Like decolonization may be a word that some people are now getting really uncomfortable with. And I've had those conversations with people. What does that mean? Is that even possible? Sometimes I prefer to say unlearning, or, and I always say that's the best thing about being ADHD, is when I found out that I had to unlearn a lot of things, I was like, I was never paying attention in the first time. So I don't have as much to unlearn as a lot of other people, but just kind of decolonizing our thinking. We talk about that, where do the beliefs that we have about ourselves or others come from? And so that's part of the program, that we do a little walk through colonization, because a lot of our people don't understand the impacts that it's had on us, or how we came to be where we're at, or not understanding who we are. So we talk about those things. We talk about, of course, where am I going? Like, what visioning, and how important that is to know that, it's a changing life. What it feels like right now might be really, really hard, but it will pass. Just like the good times, right? Everything, we have this changing life. And within feather carriers, we do, it's usually on day 2, we do John Rice's teaching. It's called the Mekons teaching. It's my favorite teaching. Mekons means little roads. So we talk about the physiological transition points that create loss throughout our life. And we talk about the little bridging bridging moments that can help us get from one stage to the next. So if you've ever heard of the 7 stages of life, the Mekon's teaching is like, it's wrapped around that, and it talks about more than where do we come from. Like, I come from Georgina Island. It starts with our creation story. So having that belief to something else, that great mystery, right? So we have that conversation with Creator about how we all agree to come here, and we all come here with a purpose. We all come here to do something. So we talk about this beautiful creation story and how we get here. And then we talk about the good life, those, I don't want to say 0 to 6 because we don't put everything in boxes, right? But that the good life is those early years. We call it the good life because all you have to do is say, wah, and you get what you want. Oh, you're hungry, here's some food. Oh, you're cold, we'll wrap you up. You're tired, you get nothing but love and taken care of in the good life. That's how life is supposed to be. And then the fast life, right? When we start, really wanting to know who we are, breaking free from who our parents tell us, we should be or how we should act. And we go out there into the world and we start challenging other people's values and rules. And because we're trying to figure out who we are. So we talk about the fast life and how fast we're developing in those years, right? Our brain, our body, physically, emotionally, all the things that are growing so fast in those years. And then the wandering years. So we go through those all those stages of life, right, to the true life, the pure life, the very last stages of life, when we're really old. Because in our teachings, we're supposed to be able to see 3 Halley's Comets. So they're like 75 years apart. So you're probably going like, what? That would mean like we're supposed to like live to 150. How could that even be possible? Well, we believe that that's how long our life was supposed to be. That when we first came here, we would have been drinking the water that was so pure. We would have been only eating the plants and the medicines that we were supposed to be eating at the times of year we were supposed to be eating. We wouldn't be trying to, do 80 hours worth of work in 5 days and stressed out and driving on the 427. We wouldn't be doing all of those things, right? We had a different life, that we're supposed to have this really long life. So we talk about that right to the very end, and all the gifts, all the changes, all the things that we pick up along the way, all the people that we impact as life promoters, right? And leaving a spirit legacy and a bloodline legacy. So when we get to the pure life, we're ready to go back home. We're ready to go back. And we talk a lot about spirit being spiritual beings and how spirit is immortal. And so we talk about that, taking that walk back to our ancestors, to that most beautiful place. So it's an incredible teaching where we spend a lot of time in each stage talking about some of the struggles that we face, where we might lose people along the way. When we know we're meant to have a long life, and that there's difficulties, and we learn about those ways, those bridges of getting back on our path when we get lost, we come to understand, things aren't always that way. I believe in this teaching so much for so many different reasons. One of them is I have a daughter that has borderline personality disorder, and she really struggles to be here. Every day is like, we just made it to another day. She's 23, and life is, it's hard for her to stay here. And on New Year's Eve of this year, her best friend died by suicide. And she called me on New Year's. And at the time she was, making some really choices that a mom doesn't want a daughter to ever make. And so she wasn't having a lot of communication with me, but she called me on New Year's and she told me what had happened to Kylie. And I asked her, you know, what, I was in shock. And I said, you know, what was going on with Kylie? Like, what do you, like, what? And she said, well, Kylie was like me, Mom. She said, you know, she struggled to be here, but I thought she knew what I knew. I thought she knew that this was a changing life and that wouldn't always be like this. And what she was doing, she was giving me back the words that I had given her 2 years earlier before she went off. Well, at the beginning of she went off on this really rough road, dark road. And she went to school to be a medical esthetician at one point, and she was doing nails. And because she never wanted me to be around her, because she was making all these tough, bad choices, and I made her feel guilty without even saying anything, I booked a nail appointment so that she would be stuck doing my nails. I don't even ever have nice nails, but I booked this nail appointment, said I was going on a trip, just so she would have to sit in front of me for an entire hour and listen to me talk, and she couldn't get away from me. So I booked this appointment 2 years ago, and for the whole hour it took her to do my nails, I gave her the Mekons teaching. I talked about it being a changing life and what stage of life she was in the moment, and how it is such, you know, such a difficult stage. This was before she had her diagnosis too. So you know, I've learned so much about that as well. But when I shared that with her, she never said anything back. It wasn't until 2 years later when she told me about her friend Kylie that she said, I thought she knew what I knew. And so I knew she heard the words, and I knew she knew that this was a changing life, and that she knew she has purpose, and she has, you know, as hard as it is right now, she has something to offer, and she has a place to go. Like that this is a moving in this direction to the next stage. And right now she's on this this road, but taking this bridge back. So we talk about that teaching, and we know that youth need it. Youth aren't getting these, aren't having these conversations, aren't getting these conversations. And it's so important. I work with our school on my First Nation all the time, telling them, you know, who cares about the curriculum? If they don't have the mental health, if they are struggling and they can't regulate their emotions or deal with the things that are going on at home, it doesn't matter if they get their high school education. What matters is, you know, this first. So I believe in these teachings. I believe they should be everywhere. They should be in the school. They should be in the courts. They should be in everywhere. So really looking at those 4 essential questions. So we do that. We talk a lot about connecting to the land and the importance of connecting to the land. So there are feather carriers. How it goes is you take the training, and then they'll offer you the opportunity to become an ojitajik, which is a helper. And so if you feel like you want to be an instructor of the program, that you can work to do that. So I'm an instructor. There's not a lot of us right now. There's John Rice, Dr. Ed Connors, Jillian Morris, I think Hilton King is now. There's about I'm not sure the numbers, but there's not a lot of us. that are out there instructing the program, but there's a lot of Ojitajic that are coming up to start delivering this program as well. So the coordinator for feathered carriers asked me if I would come and speak today at this justice conference. And I was like, oh, why me? You know, I'm going to say something that I shouldn't say. Like, I'm from the Department of Too Much Personal Information for one thing. And I'm going to, like, God knows, I'll probably get us all in trouble. You could probably pick somebody. And they're like, no, you go, Shannon. And I said, so what do you want me to talk about? Like, if I'm not doing the training, what is it that you think I could bring? So everybody brings something else. This is the thing. It's not scripted. It's not a scripted training. That's not how we do things. What I bring to feather carriers now, because it's a changing life, so I'm always kind of changing what I'm talking about, is I've been talking a lot about Devin Freeman. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time now talking about Devin and why feather carriers is so, life promotion is so important for me, and what we learned from my band member, Devin Freeman, who was a youth in care. And when Devin was about to turn 16, and I did see Hamilton is out there in the audience somewhere. So the person from Hamilton may be very aware of the Devin Freeman inquest. Devin Freeman was a band member of Georgina Island just before he turned 16. His grandmother asked the Children's Aid Society, Hamilton CAS, for some help with Devin. He had a lot of struggles with his behavior, his mental health, and he always had since he was young. Him and my daughter were born the same year in 2000, and she also struggled with a lot of things that Devin struggled with. But Devin didn't have the same family upbringing as my daughter. And he was taken into care at 2. He was returned. His mom was in a very abusive relationship. His mom passed when he was just 6 years old. He really struggled with that. And his grandmother adopted him. But just before his 16th birthday, his grandma got sick, and she went to the Children's Aid Society and she asked for help because she couldn't manage his behavior anymore. She was in and out of the hospital, and she had tried everything. And when I say she had tried everything, she had been everywhere, every hospital, every age, like she had him in every program there was. So Hamilton recommended mental health residential placement with a youth mental health facility called Linwood Charleston Center in Flamborough. And because Devin was going to be 16 and he wasn't in need of protection, Pam had to agree to or consent to making him a Crown ward. This was before the age was raised to 18. So basically at the age of 16, they wouldn't be able to help him or have an open file on him unless he was a Crown ward. So she basically had to give up custody of her grandson to get him a bed for his help. So he was put in there, and the band, so back to I'm a band rep. What a band rep does, it's in the Child and Family Service Act. Each First Nation can have a band rep. A band rep becomes a party to a case if a child is involved with Children's Aid Society. So in the 60s, when CASs were scooping up Indigenous kids and adopting them and placing them out all over the place, after so many years of doing that, First Nations advocated to say, you must stop taking our children away. The child welfare system is now the new residential school system. So how do, we want that to stop. So they added in the act band rep. They never gave any funding. They never gave anything to accompany that back then, but they said the First Nations have a right to be a party at the case. So that means CASs have to notify the CAS for things like if a child is going to be a Crown ward. So they notified me. They called me up just before Devin was 16, and they said, we want to make him a Crown ward so we can get him help at this mental health facility. Or do you have something there better? Well, I've got a little island with 200 people. I have no gas station, no stores, no nothing here. Our school only goes up till grade 5. So I said, if you send Devin here with complex, mental health needs, I'm not going to be able to help him. In fact, after grade 5, we have to send our kids off reserve just to get them to go to school. So he'd end up living with at a stranger's house. So I said, what do you guys have? And that's when they told me about Linwood, and that was their only option, but it was much better than I had. And Grandma was on board and Devin was on board. So as the First Nation consented, I did consent to the Crown wardship, although I did that with a lot of hesitation. And I wrote that in my notes or my affidavit when I sent back, that First Nations never like to agree to Crown wardships, but if that was the only way to get help and the family was asking, that we would agree. I told them at that time, if anything went wrong or he wasn't happy there, to let me know, and I would come and try to help find something better. I never heard again from Hamilton CAS until the following year. It was in June of 2017. And I got a letter in the mail and I opened it up and it was Devin's death certificate. It didn't make a lot of sense to me, because if a child dies, I would have assumed I would have known, and that the CAS would tell me that, or someone. I just couldn't make any sense of it. So I went to my laptop, and although I had never met Devin and I didn't know his family that well, because of what I talked about earlier on, my own mother being removed from her community through marriage, that's the same thing that happened to Devin's grandmother. Also, because the Indian agent used to place our people in schools all over, because it only went up to grade 5, and they did that until into the 70s. So a lot of especially our women, were displaced all over. So Pam, his grandmother, was ended up in Hamilton when she was placed by the Indian agent in a school far away and not able to return home. So although I didn't know them, I knew they belonged to my nation, and I knew they had been removed just like my mom, and that really mattered to me. So I Googled Devin's name, and the first thing that came up was a missing persons report from October of the year before. And I was like, he went missing in October. And then I searched a little bit more. And then I found another article that he had been found in April. So I got up the nerve to phone his grandmother and tell her I had received the death certificate she sent me, and I didn't know what happened, and could she please explain to me? She told me that Devin had ran away on October 6th. A missing persons report didn't go out for him until the end of November. And he was found in April by some kids at the group home that went into the backyard to play ball hockey, and one of the balls rolled into the bush, and he was found 35 meters from the back door, hanging in a tree where he had been for almost 7 months. I was shocked and devastated, and I felt like I had failed Devin as a band rep, and I was angry. I was so many things, and I didn't know what to do. So, but I knew one thing. I knew that this could happen again. I knew that the system had failed, not just one system, a bunch of systems. I didn't know why the police didn't look for him. Why didn't they look in Like, why didn't they search the property? I didn't understand why the CAS hadn't notified me. I was angry with myself for, even though we were unfunded, so it was an unpaid position for 26 years. I did on top of my regular job. I was so angry that I hadn't checked in on him to see how he was doing. And instead, I just was hoping that the society would call me if they had trouble, because that's what normally happened. There were so many failures, systematic failures. And I was so afraid it would happen again. So I started asking around. I started asking the ministry. I started asking every executive director of every child welfare agency I knew. I was asking everyone, shouldn't I know what happened? But as soon as I started asking questions, everybody lawyered up. The police lawyered up, the mental health agency lawyered up, the CAS lawyered up, and I couldn't get any answers. So I called, I went back to the beginning and I went, well, I'm going to phone Cindy Blackstock. I'm going to see if she remembers me from 25 years ago, 27 years ago. And in fact, I'm just going to phone her lawyer. So that's what I did. I called Sarah Clark, who is Cindy's lawyer, and I told them what happened to Devin. And I asked them, what can I do? I can't, they're telling me that an internal investigation was done and everything was done right. And I don't, how could anyone say things were done right when you know, he was there that entire time? Well, what went wrong? So the first thing I did was I subpoenaed the files, and when I got them, I found out that he had run away over 37 times. He had run away from May to October from that group home. And then I found out it had been documented that he had said he was going to die by suicide 18 times. And one of those times he said he came in the home with another youth from the center and had tried to hang himself in a tree in the backyard when the other youth had cut him down. So when I got that information, it really made no sense to me on why didn't anyone look? Like, why did it? So I got angry and I started asking, okay, now what are my options? Because things were done wrong. And I was given 4 options, one of them being call for a discretionary coroner's inquest into his death, so we can shine a big spotlight on all of the systems that were involved and who dropped the ball, where and why, and how can we prevent this from happening again? How can we get recommendations to do better for our First Nation kids, especially the ones that are struggling with thoughts of suicide? So that's what I did. I found out that if you die on the job in Ontario, you are automatically given an inquest, so that you never, so that doesn't happen again on the job. But I found out if you're a child and you die in care, you're not automatically given an inquest. It's called discretionary, and you have to work really hard to get one. They told me my chances were like 1 in 1,000 if I would even get it. There's so many applications for these inquests. So the very best thing I could do was get support to call it. So I asked those agencies, and none of them would give the support until the Hamilton Police Services made a media announcement probably about 6 months after I started trying to get the inquest. And they said that they would support Georgina Island's application for an inquest, that they too wanted to know what they could have done better to prevent it from happening again. And that was really helpful. So the more agencies and the more people that started to support us, the better chance we had. So we were finally granted that inquest, and then COVID hit. So it turned into a 5-year process, which was extremely hard on the grandmother. on Devin's grandmother, Pam. It is, and that was my biggest fear, was doing more harm. And so at one point I went to John Rice, who is the developer of one of them, of feather carriers. And I was crying and I said, there's no Indigenous process to look at like how we can do better. I just want everybody to come down and sit in a circle and talk about what they did and what they didn't do and how we could have done better. But no one will come to the table like that. There is no Indigenous process. There's no alternative for us to look at this. So I said, the only option I have is this very colonial way of doing things. It sounds horrible. Everybody's telling me, they're going to put me on the stand and cross-examine me for 2 days. And all of those workers, they're going to make us feel bad. It's going to be awful what I'm going to do to these people and the family. And I started getting scared. But this is what John told me. He said, everybody comes here with a purpose, right? And he talked to me about that Mekon's teaching, how Devin came here and he had a job. And, he doesn't know. He said, I don't know why sometimes our young ones leave before their time. But when they do, they always leave a message. And then it's up to us to figure out what that message is and carry it forward for them. So they're walking alongside us and they're watching us carry out their purpose. And so when he told me that, and he said, if the only way you can hear what his message is clearly is through the inquest, then I say do it. So I went right for it. And we called lots of we got the inquest. We called lots of expert witnesses. We had Barb Fallon, we had Cindy Blackstock, we had Ed Connors. I put all of the Indigenous expert witnesses that I could up on the stand so that people could hear the jury, who was going to be a non-Native jury, because it's a random pick of Hamilton public. I knew that the chances of getting First Nations people on there were very slim. So there were 5 non-Native jurors. I barely understand Indigenous child welfare, and I've been doing it for 27 years. So I had no idea how they were going to make recommendations. I was scared. So I made sure that what happened was all of the parties of the case, 11 parties got standing, really learned about Indigenous ways of looking at suicide prevention, working with youth, what we call life promotion, and how we all can benefit from creating plans for anyone, not just youth, but for anyone, creating plans with what we call two-eyed seeing. And that means we need more than Western knowledge put into a plan for an individual, that we also need to bring Indigenous knowledge to the table, that it's not just good for Indigenous people, it's good for all people, and it deserves a place at the table. And that's what Devin was missing. What I found out in the inquest, when they talked about him running away, they called it AWOL. They say that they're strength-based. So AWOL is it's a military offense, right? And so when I took the stand and they talked about the difficulties of helping Devin because he was always running away, he was always AWOL. And so I get it. I work with families that don't show up for an appointment. I know how hard it is to get a psychologist or a therapist appointment. And when they're gone, it's so frustrating. I understand that. But I also said, I wanted them to look at things from an Indigenous worldview. So when I took the stand, instead, I talked about how I seen him running away or being AWOL as a strength. And we have to stop using language like running away or being AWOL. And they asked me about that. What do you mean you've seen it as one of his strengths? I said, that's an hour outside of Hamilton, his residential home. So when he couldn't regulate his emotions, which happened on that day, when he couldn't regulate his emotions, he would run to Hamilton. That was an entire hour of him putting his feet on the land, walking through woods, walking through farmers' fields, feeling the rain, feeling the wind or the sun. hearing the birds, looking at the sky. That's land-based therapy. By the time he got to Hamilton, he was de-escalated. And where did he go nearly every single time? He went to the Indian Friendship Center in Hamilton. He ran to his culture. He ran where he belonged, where he felt like he belonged. That's incorporating, Indigenous therapeutic approaches into these kids' lives. Get them on the land, get them involved with their culture, teach them who they are, where they come from, that they belong. He was more than a kid that carried a status card. One of the greatest, we got 75 recommendations. I only got a couple minutes left, and I wanted to ask I want to make sure that you can ask me some questions, but I just want to talk about this one recommendations. You can look them up. I could have read all 75 of them to you and you would have been really bored and not paid attention, but you can look at them because they're it's a lot, 75, but I'm going to talk about this one recommendation that, on the very first day of the inquest, I held it on Georgina Island. I had to advocate for that. It's first time ever a coroner's inquest was held outside the community it happened into in a First Nation. So the first day, everyone came to Georgina Island. The rest of the time it was held in Hamilton. On the last day, when the police were giving their submissions, when they should have been putting in their recommendations, the lawyer said, I want to take this moment instead to talk about what Georgina Island's asking in one of their recommendations, and it's called the right to return. He said, when I went to Georgina Island that day, that first day when we were leaving, he said, I was standing on the boat and I was looking at the shining water and I was looking at the island and I was thinking about what happened that day, that the police, the Children's Aid Society, the treatment home, all of these systems that have hurt Indigenous people went to their community that day. And you know what happened? We were embraced with love. They sang to us. Their children came out. The elders spoke to us. There was a sacred fire. They fed us. They embraced us with love. It was a beautiful day. He said, I was standing on that barge and I was looking at the shining water thinking this might have been the best day of my career. And I was so grateful for that. And he goes, and then it struck me that I got to spend the day there and Devin never did. And for that, my number one recommendation is the right to return, which we asked for, that every child working with a child welfare agency, if they want to go home, if they want to put their feet on the land of where they came from, they should have the right to ask to do that. And that society has the obligation to take them there because we're more than a status card. And we've been removed from our communities from the beginning of contact, through the 60s group, through residential schools, all through, enfranchisement, all of those, it's been a criminal offense. Like it's in the Indian Act, we were removed. So now I believe it's the system's obligation to return us when we want to go, those youth. So we asked for that. He supported that. When the inquest, when the jury came back, we were told we might get 6 or 7 recommendations. They came back with 75. We gave them 74 to consider, and they came back not with only all 74, but one more they made up themselves. But when they read out the right to return, they said not only should it be implemented in the law, it should be named Devon's principle. In that moment, I had so much faith in people again, whether you're non-native or they got it. They understood the importance of knowing who you are and where you come from. And that's what we need. Like that is so essential to our mental well-being and part of this, suicide prevention program. They heard all about feather carriers and this philosophy, Anishinaabe philosophy about these 4 essential questions and how important it is for all people to be able to answer those. So they really got it. It was a really, it was a really difficult process, but it was really successful. And again, through that whole inquest, I learned more and more about the importance of life promotion and that we need to be doing more than suicide prevention. So I am just gonna stop because we only got 5 minutes. And here I was worried. I was like, said to them, does anybody end early? Because I might only have about 15 minutes worth of stuff to say. And here we are. I'm not even giving 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Shannon.
Thank you, Shannon. Yes, I so thankful and so grateful that you shared that story, and I learned a lot, and I hope others did as well. If you have a question for Shannon, feel free to put it into the chat. Also, if you want to raise your hand, we can also ask you to do that as well. It's definitely up to you. Ella, do we have any questions or comments so far?
Yes, we had a couple of comments. One person wrote, love this. Often when youth are AWOL from our group home, they're having social, people are asking, they're having social, musical, or adventurous experiences. What else could it be called other than an AWOL protocol? The question here. Any thoughts on naming?
Oh, I'm so sorry. See, that's why I don't look at this chat box. I started reading it and forgot that was my ADHD. Sorry, can you give it to me one more time?
Yes, absolutely. There's the question about renaming the AWOL protocol and what your thoughts are on renaming.
Oh, yes. So that is one of the recommendations. So if you Google the recommendations, it's like, right, it's under, I think it's the ministry, one of the recommendations to the ministry. And so what they're saying is to use neutral language, more descriptive language on like a child has been or a child left the property, like whatever is happening, to use that to describe what is happening, or come up with a more neutral word.
Okay, thank you so much. And we have someone asking how they can get more information about participating in the training.
I think that there is information through this conference wherever the resources are, but you can also go onto wisepractices.ca, I believe, or just Google feather carrier training. And you can go onto the website and ask about training. Yeah.
I just posted the link in the chat for Wise Practices, and I also found the recommendations in the inquest. So I put that link in the chat as well. Just looking. Someone's asking if you could please say the 4 essential questions again.
Okay, it is, where do I come from? Who am I? What is my purpose? And where am I going?
Okay, thank you so much. Lots of positive comments in the chat. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We just have 1 more minute. Is there any other questions we have?
I can do the outro while we wait.
Thanks, Anne.
I just want to say personally, thank you so much, Shannon. It was such a pleasure to spend this afternoon with you. Please join me in thanking our speaker for her great presentation and for sharing her knowledge with us. Please take a few moments to complete the evaluation. The link can be found at the bottom of the session page. Thank you again, Shannon, and everyone for participating and for your questions and your comments as well. Please join us in the plenary room for our day 2 closing remarks. Unless anybody has other questions, we can definitely take some time now as well. And I would like to remind everyone that all sessions have been recorded and will be available on the platform for you to watch at your leisure for the next 3 months. And before we end it, just going to do a last call for questions. Any questions? Well, it's almost 3:30 on my end. Once again, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Ella. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you for the closing remarks.